Hey guys, Kyle here. So, just before the show starts, I wanted to mention our Patreon. You can pay us $1 a month as a thank you, as a tip. You can pay $2 a month to get access to one of our bonus content shows, episodes 2 days early, and a secret Discord chat where all of our Patreon donors get to go and hang out and talk with us directly. Then there's a $5 tier that you can donate to get access to a whole bunch more content. We have multiple bonus episodes on there. So please check it out. Patreon.com/itgetsweird. We don't advertise, we don't make money. So check it out and throw some money if you think that would be cool. Thanks. Welcome to It Gets Weird, our comedy show where we explore the unusual, the unbelievable, and the unexplained to try and make your world a little weirder. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Niall. And this week, there's no 442 hertz, right? There's not like
I don't think
second. So. There's no like sequel where they like did that. So there's not like a thing here. Okay,
that's okay.
Well, then,
I have a thing.
Okay.
If I mean, like, I don't want to like trample over your thing. If you got a thing.
Oh, my lack of thing? Yeah, go ahead. Trample all over that shit.
Check this out. All right, Niall, edit out what I'm about to say here. I got this, okay? I'm gonna nail it. Yeah. This is gonna be good opening for the show, and everybody's gonna love it at home, okay? Welcome to It Gets Weird. Fuck you. If you're listening to this right now, that's all I gotta say to you. Fuck you. You know what you did. You know what you did. And I want you to know out there that I heard about it.
So you're just trying to give our listeners some interesting anxieties about this is kind of the scammer email.
Yes.
Hey, we know that stuff you're watching, blanket email.
Yes.
Thing
If you don't want me to tell everybody that you know and care about that fucking thing you did that made me say fuck you up front at the start of this episode, you're gonna have to wire me one whole Bitcoin, which I think is something like it's like $20,000 or something. It's a pittance,
I
really.
Don't know. Yeah, it's nothing in this economy.
Exactly. No, so honestly, though, I was trying to sort of set the tone for this episode. We got a lot to talk about, Niall. And it's funny. Kind of a weird day.
Okay.
You know, you had a bad day at work, crap at work, right? You know, the shit. I don't normally talk about specific dated things, but like we also found out David Lynch passed away today.
Correct.
It's a fucked up day. I'm here to make it worse.
Oh shit. Fantastic. Let's really dive to the fucking bottom here. Do you want to do a QAnon episode?
Well, no, this is not a QAnon episode, but what I will say is if, I have to do a warning up front on this episode, okay? Got to talk about some dark stuff. That would include some brief mentions of sexual assault, animal abuse, physical and mental torture, and murder. So I have to talk about all those things. I didn't, plan to, talk about this on the worst day of 2025 so far, but here we are. That's just, hey, let's think of it in a positive way of like, we're purging all the fucked up shit right now. It's gonna be a bad time, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, let's think about this positively, like the purge, which is the most positive thing you can do, which is purge. So, both movie franchise and also like, I don't know, like what's another purge? I guess like cleaning up your fucking desktop. I don't know.
Yeah, or like going to the ancient Greek vomitorium or whatever. Or was that Roman?
Yeah.
Was that Roman? That might have been Roman, actually.
It might have been.
I think it's Roman. Yeah, this is ablution of negative energies this episode.
Okay.
So I guess what I have to say is I have to take a little step away from my pet subject for a couple episodes after this one. So yeah, just a warning up front on the content in this episode. There will be a couple mentions of some really shitty stuff. Niall,
Yeah.
Louis Jolyon West was born October 6th, 1924. Do you know that name? I sort of don't think you do.
Yeah, I don't know if I do. That doesn't ring a bell.
It's, I think, been briefly mentioned in another episode in a way that like you wouldn't have to remember, like it wouldn't stick out, I think, because anyways, Louis Jolyon West, or I'm gonna call him by his nickname because it's the most fun way to talk about him. This man was referred to as Jolly West.
Interesting. Okay.
He was born in 1924 to Ukrainian Jewish immigrants. And I had to, I knew who this guy was, and I see Ukrainian Jewish immigrant, and that's my family. So I had to like suppress the urge to be like, yo, shouts out, Ukrainian Jewish immigrant. That's my family too, but we're cool, actually. So I read, let me start like this. I read some interviews from the 80s, and I read a couple obituaries because the guy died in 1999. Because I was curious how he was portrayed in media, how he was reported on. And believe it or not, they tend to miss some things about the guy.
Okay.
So looking at these obituaries, there's a discrepancy. First of all, for whatever reason, there's a discrepancy about where he was born. I think he was actually born in Madison, Wisconsin. There is an obituary that says he was born in Brooklyn, New York. I don't know what happened there. But nonetheless, Jolly's mother gave him the middle name of Jolyon, which is a name after a character from John Galsworthy's Forsyte Saga novels, which I'd never read. I don't really know anything about them, but
that's not one I'm aware of.
Well, it's a story about like the goings-ons of like new money families. It seems very dramatic and basically I don't know. It's about new money, right? It's about like the sort of various people and their new money, the social lives of those people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the LA Times obituary that I read suggests that his name and his mother quote, convinced him that he was destined to do great things. I also have an LA Times interview with Jolly West.
His name and his mother convinced him he was destined for great things.
Sorry, I maybe said that weird. His mother named him Jolyon from the Forsyte Saga about these like powerful, wealthy people, and that was sort of part of his steez that he would go on to do something great.
Right.
The guy has a bit of an ego, you find when you read about him. But I actually have his own words about this feeling during his upbringing. So Jolly says this, quote, describing his own experience, Freud once observed, and I paraphrase, that the only son of a doting mother is very likely to grow up feeling he is destined to accomplish great things. And as far back as I can remember, I felt that. My mother always told me, you can do anything. You are a genius. You have great gifts. You've got to use them. Don't waste them.
Okay.
He goes on to say...
I love a good old fashioned special little boy. We talk about these every once in a while where someone is just like convinced that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. And a lot of times that leads to them being... I have no idea what this guy's deal is, but a lot of times you end up getting either like a grifter thing out of it or they do some absolutely horrible shit.
Yeah, you kind of... There is an undercurrent through some of this guy's writing where he almost seems to see other people as maybe beneath him. Like I said, there's an ego thing going on here. So he goes on to say, and while I was always wasteful of them, I'm sure the idea took hold that I could do anything I set my mind to. And this combined with another idea: the more fortunate have to look out for the less fortunate. We were, in fact, quite poor. Some of our neighbors didn't have jobs. Some had no books. The family across the street had no bathtub. It was strictly the wrong side of the tracks, but in our house there was an attitude of thank God we're in America, and there was always a willingness to help others. I was a very fast reader and I remembered what I read. Where I really discovered what it meant to make a sustained, goal-directed, painful effort to achieve something was in sports. You have to train, you have to sacrifice, you have to hurt in order to get really good in a major sport. That was a terrific learning experience for me.
Okay.
So, you know, some naive patriotism, which like it's a thing we've run into before, where like these immigrants come over and America's, I guess, better than what they're leaving behind, and so thank God we're here. Now, these quotes, like I said, they're from a 1985 LA Times article where they're interviewing Jolyon and his wife, Dr. Catherine West. In addition to these older articles and interviews, I also, like I said, I found these obituaries from 1999 that when you read them, you are painted this picture of a civil rights activist, very outspoken, a peacenik who ironically worked in the United States Air Force Medical Service in the wake of World War II, where he earned the rank of major. So, like, yes, he worked with the military, but it was in a medical capacity. And really, he's all about peace. In fact, he would have a moment in his life that we're going to come to where he would start to be adamant about opposing the death penalty. He would stick to that.
Okay. Interesting.
And he was also a man that was interested in investigating the seductive mysteries of life. But most importantly, the thing that he's remembered for is that he was a specialist of psychiatry who is focused on the study of brainwashing, cults, drugs, and torture.
There it is. Okay. So his whole, that's his steez. He's talking about brainwashing and torture and all, and kind of all of those things that will hang out a lot in the CIA at that time, or not at this time, in the 60s and 70s and all that time.
Yeah, 50s through the 70s, yes.
Yeah.
These articles really make him sound pretty great, but when I read it, because like I almost like worked backwards, where it's like I didn't work backwards, sorry. I guess what I mean to say is, knowing what I knew about him, and then reading these obituaries from 99 and the interviews in like the 80s, it's like absurd foreshadowing. In one of the articles, he says that the year after high school, when he was 18, that's when he enlisted in the army.
Okay.
And in that interview, he says he wanted to, quote, show Hitler there were Jews who knew how to fight and to kill. And then reportedly, the article says that he chuckles here and adds, quote, I was a bloodthirsty young fellow.
Okay.
So Jolly was initially assigned to an infantry unit, but before he could actually see any combat, that would, satiate his bloodthirst, I guess.
Yeah, he's got his bloodlust remains unquenched because he gets transferred to do medical stuff.
Yeah, he needed to kill, but they were like, no, we need you to, do doctor shit.
But I mean, like, just being a doctor doesn't preclude you from killing. Like, you can do a Hannibal thing.
You can do all kinds of cool shit as a doctor that is basically killing.
Yeah.
So,
what's that fucking horror movie, like Dr. Giggles or some shit, where he's like, it's like an anesthesiologist? I don't know.
1 hour photo. Wait, no, he's not a doctor in that movie. He's like a weird loner.
He works at a 1 hour photo.
Yeah, right. I don't know why I thought of that. I think I was confusing 1 hour photo and Patch Adams.
Yeah, I think you're just like conflating two Robin Williams vehicles.
Yeah, maybe. So yeah, he gets transferred. And then he ends up going to the University of Iowa, where he would basically rapid fire work to study medicine. He becomes a physician. He studies psychiatry. And this ends up leading to his stint with the medical service with the Army. Now, this all was kind of like he was set on a new trajectory that he had not anticipated for his life. But on top of that, he claims that when he was there, he had sort of this like mind-altering experience as well.
Okay.
And he says this, quote, it was only after I got into pre-med that a kind of magical experience took place. I was studying a frog, and all of a sudden it came to me that whatever made the frog's heart beat was the same thing that made ours. It was the great mystery of life. I was never the same after that. So he has
Okay.
he has a
Were there drugs involved with this revelation? Like, I know that's kind
No.
of stereotypical, but I get the idea of like, oh, there is some spark of life that is across all animals, including us. Sure. That's something.
I don't think that for this particular moment there actually were drugs involved, but like I can tell you this much. Jolly West was very interested in LSD. You might
Yeah, there
be
you go.
unsurprised to find out. But he just kind of says that. He just says that while he was there, he had this experience. I guess it's honestly possible that he did take LSD and that's where this experience came from, but there's nothing to actually.
No, I mean, like, I could see it just being this thing of like, if you're interested in the kind of larger questions in life, I could see it just being that way. It's just like that is such a that's such a fucking like it's gauche to say, but it's like a thing that you'd say when you try weed for the first time, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's the sort of thing with like a psychedelic like LSD or like mushrooms, where like you do kind of get this sense of like reality encompassing unity with things. Have you ever done LSD? Is that
no.
Can I ask you that? Okay.
All right. Yeah, you can. I have not.
Yeah, me neither.
That's not.
So
yeah.
So during the Korean War, which would have been 1950 to 1953, which I'm going to say this right now because there's going to be a bunch of things that come up like this. There are things that I just can't get into because they are just so huge and episode encompassing. Like if we were to talk about psychological operations that went down during the Korean War, we would be all over the fucking place. We don't have time. Maybe in another episode.
Fair enough.
But during the Korean War, Jolly was appointed as chief of psychiatric services at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, which was a headquarters for Air Force intelligence. You may recall from our series of episodes on MK Ultra, which was the secret CIA mind control project, and for those listening, that is episodes 421 to 423. There was this whole thing where Americans who were returning from the Korean War were talking about, they were basically blowing the whistle on the U.S.'s use of illegal chemical and biological warfare. Like I think germ warfare specifically, if you remember from those episodes, like they came back from the war saying, yeah, we were involved in war crimes. Now, these were airmen who had been captured during the Korean War, like I said, and as the story goes, something like 36 of the 59 airmen would end up confessing to these war crimes, being involved in some way or witnessing them. Now, the CIA is like, that can't be. Or the military, this is bad PR for the United States.
You don't look good with that at all.
Jolly West was assigned to a panel to assess these veterans, and this is around the time that there was speculation in the media that these men had been brainwashed. But if you'll remember, also from the MK Ultra episodes, brainwashing was a term that did not exist until 1950. And it came into being because a CIA anti-communist propagandist named Edward Hunter wrote about it and published it. And the idea here was that this idea of brainwashing would deflect from the idea that these Americans had any sympathies being expressed with the people in Korea or China. Like,
yeah,
the idea here is that it can't be that there is an authentic sympathy here. It is that the evil communists have brainwashed them. A lot of this was during MK Ultra, they're thinking like, well, they have like a secret mind altering drug where they can force people to say these things or whatever, or believe these things. In fact, I think some of the Americans that were captured by the Chinese during the war, they would end up just straight up defecting to the other side. They would stay there.
Yeah, and you can't have that for like this righteous cause of war that we're doing where
Yeah.
Your soldiers are like, "Oh, wait, this sucks. I don't want to do this."
Fucked up.
And I don't want to be a part of this.
Yeah, and like, the CIA and the FBI this is like I think the height of the Cold War, you could argue. They're just rabidly anti-communist at this time, and they don't want any bad PR for America that also results in like what is effectively positive PR for China. So brainwashing is cooked up as the explanation for why Americans would do such a horrible thing. The irony of it all is that the CIA, through programs like MK Ultra, would basically research ways of doing their own version of brainwashing, the thing that they made up.
Mm-hmm.
So Jolly, along with other panelists, he assesses these men while these rumors of brainwashing spread. And a part of Jolly's enduring legacy was that he was at the forefront of research into this so-called, like, the brainwashing techniques of the Chinese, the communists. And this allowed him to become adept at deprogramming folks like the POW airmen. So,
which deprogramming also is bullshit, right? Like,
well, here's the thing. Here's where things get kind of weird for me, believe it or not.
Okay.
I don't know whether deprogramming is bullshit, but like, if you take the idea of brainwashing at face value, it's not that these people were brainwashed, obviously, but like,
right.
The idea that you could manipulate somebody's memory and persuade them to have like all the things that MK Ultra was trying to do, I can't dismiss all of it as myth necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So like, you could make an argument that brainwashing is a thing, but it only is a thing with the term brainwashing stuck to it after this point, right?
Gotcha.
So
okay.
I don't know if that makes sense, but like, hopefully you get what I'm trying to get at here. And
I think so.
Not to get too far ahead of myself, but like, you'll recall also in the MK Ultra episodes how like officially there was no value to these experiments and the research they were conducting with all this stuff. At the same time, they also destroyed most of the documents concerning it because it was of no value. Why would it's the weird question of like, if it was of no value, then why care about destroying it?
Right, which leads a bunch of people to believe that the stuff just went deeper secret and yada yada. So like now those programs just moved deeper and they torched the evidence so that no one could follow their tracks and stuff. Like, so there's that whole side of the thing. But largely, it's
exactly. Now here's the thing though, and brainwashing and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about with MK Ultra, Jolly West would come to a conclusion that this stuff was possible.
Okay.
So we'll get there. What's interesting here is that these airmen who were like blowing the whistle here, he comes to the conclusion in this particular case that this was actually not brainwashing, not with like drugs or anything. He thinks it's something a bit different. In his own words, quote, "Brainwashing became a term applied to every circumstance in which one person was influenced by others to change his behavior or thinking. And when a word comes to mean too much, it loses what value it might have had. Brainwashing isn't a term I use myself, except in order to dismiss it and then focus on what really happened."
That I actually agree with. This general sentiment of like, if you make a word mean too many things, it loses all meaning.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what he thinks the reality of what some people would call brainwashing actually is.
I generally agree with the sentiment as well. Now, according to Jolly, what had actually happened to these prisoners of war was simple. They had been extremely sleep deprived. So he goes on to say, quote, "What happens in coerced confinement can be called the 3 Ds: debility, dread, and dependency." Was that the shit that Luigi wrote on the bullets?
I think so, yeah.
He says, "A prisoner is debilitated by inactivity, by sleep loss, or worse, by physical harm. He is filled with dread by constant threats of pain or death or harm to his family. He is rendered completely dependent upon his captors for information, food, shelter, life. Under these conditions, there's a tendency to regress and develop almost a childish relationship to the captors, a total dependency, with the result that, even without actual physical torture, a confession is given." So Jolly would also argue that under these conditions, a prisoner may even come to believe the confession, regardless of how true it may have been. And this was his analysis of the airmen, and through his work deprogramming them, he was, I'm going to kind of say deprogram in scare quotes, because I don't actually know entirely what that entails. He claims he was able to get most of them to renounce their crimes. Straight up, these people retracted their thing about using biological warfare in the war. So officially, the original confessions to U.S. war crimes were basically never true.
Gotcha.
Jolly published a paper titled "United States Air Force Prisoners of the Chinese Communist: Methods of Forceful Indoctrination, Observations, and Interviews." This research allowed the airmen to avoid actually being court-martialed. And beyond this sleep deprivation and brainwashing research, Jolly was also picking up an interest in the study of LSD while he was working on the Air Force Base. So here's the thing. When I read the stuff that he was describing, that's kind of what I think of brainwashing as being. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, unless you talk about a total, like, mystical version of that, where it's something more like you turn into like a zombie type thing. But like, largely, yeah, that would be what I would consider it.
Yeah. So it's a little weird to me that he wants to say that it's not brainwashing, but then gives no specific terms what it is, just like a paragraph's worth of explanation of the things you can do to induce a state where a subject would admit to things that aren't true. You know, it's like, sorry, it just sounds like brainwashing to me when I read it. At least what I know brainwashing to be. So here's the other thing with Jolly West. Whenever I had to research MKUltra stuff, over the years working on this podcast, I've had to reassess my understanding of lots of things. I think.
Oh, yeah, still do.
I still do. You know, LSD, the CIA itself, humanity in general.
Yep.
I've had to
even the terms conspiracy theory. Like, you gotta. There's a lot of things you have to reassess.
Jolly West and his story has got me wanting to reassess and start from scratch and learn from scratch my understanding of hypnotism.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
One of Jolly's specializations was in hypnotism, and something that is abundantly clear after reading about this guy. MKUltra is obviously like got a lot of stuff to do with drugs and whatnot, but like hypnotism was also a huge thing. It was very important to what they wanted to do. Not long after his work with the prisoners of war, Jolly became chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Oklahoma. Also, a little side note here, but Jolly had previously completed his residency in psychiatry at Cornell University. And remember, he's working with the Air Force at the base where Air Force intelligence is. There's connections here. So
right.
Cornell was one of the universities that had a heavy CIA presence. For MKUltra reasons. They had all these fronts in institutions and whatnot. It was also the site of a CIA front organization called the Human Ecology Fund. That's just straight up a fake organization. They did shit at the university to do MKUltra shit.
Yeah, okay.
So somewhere in there between Jolly's bona fides from working with the military and his at some point getting noticed by intelligence, probably at Cornell, The CIA would then swoop in on the good doctor. So
Got to make that guy an asset.
yeah. You will recall how the CIA, like I said, all these front organizations, they would tap into scientists and psychologists like Jolly West. In one of the texts that I was reading, they straight up just say it's not that they had like some organized structure to how they were doing this. It was more like they had a network of loosely connected academics and stuff that they could just tap into. So he was a part of that network. Jolly West is arguably one of the CIA's biggest special little boys.
Okay, kind of. So he's kind of like in a consultant type role where he's doing whatever, like is brought in for various jobs and stuff.
Yeah. The term that kept coming up in my brain as I read about this guy is he is basically an MK Ultra soldier. He is a believer in the importance of the MK Ultra projects and it's like its applications, I guess is the term I'm looking for. He seemed to be a true believer. And yeah, this research would target the same areas we've established in previous episodes about MK Ultra, which would be mind control, hallucinogens, social engineering, psychological warfare. Can we influence any of these things with substances and so on? The important distinction here, though, like I said, is that Jolly West was the prominent researcher of hypnotism for the CIA. So we're going to talk about some extremely weird, suspicious shit surrounding Jolly and his hypnotism research. That may or may not have something to do with him and this research. And like I said, I'm now like rethinking how effective, because I feel like not long ago I was just saying hypnotism's kind of like a bullshit thing.
Yeah, it's kind of bunk.
I'm kind of reassessing how effective it actually is.
Interesting. Okay.
At least the idea that you can induce a suggestible state in a subject where they are more easily influenced. I'm now kind of coming to the other side of like, this is possible.
I mean, is it like one of those things where it requires you like to like sleep deprivation and shit like that, or is it something that you can like learn to do and like force on somebody?
That's a great question, because there are stories we cannot get to that are related to this.
Mm-hmm.
Let me put it this way: there's a story that Manson may have been an adept hypnotist.
Interesting.
I can't, obviously this is so like all of this is in big scare quotes. I don't know that, obviously, but can you just do it to somebody? Do you have to? Usually when I'm running across people claiming that it's possible, it's like you do have to manipulate somebody. You have to isolate them, deprive them of sleep. There's a lot of different things that come up, but like, I also don't know with like so many of these things, I don't know with 100% certainty, but the stories that surround Jolly West freak me out.
Gotcha. Okay.
So now he's incorporated into the CIA's network of academics and researchers, and he gets top secret clearance, Jolly West, and a $20,000 grant for MK Ultra Sub Project 43. He submits a proposal titled Psychophysiological Studies of Hypnosis and Suggestibility, and there's an accompanying document that he writes titled Studies of Dissociative States. So in the Dissociative States document, Jolly says this, quote, "There is considerable experimental evidence pointing to the significant role played by dissociative mechanisms in the production of the various phenomena of hypnosis. In fact, hypnosis may be considered to be a pure culture, laboratory-controlled dissociative reaction. Of the entire phenomenology of the various states I have described, there is not one single manifestation which cannot be produced experimentally in the hypnotic subject. Before this, he describes like a series of different things that he would classify as hypnotic states or dissociative states.
Mhm.
Thus, through the use of hypnosis as a laboratory device, the dissociative mechanisms can be studied with a high degree of objectivity. Of increasing interest at the present time are the actions of a variety of new drugs which alter the state of psychological functioning. Some of these agents produce disturbances of perception and integration. Others produce alterations of autonomic reactivity through inhibition of central, and then in parentheticals he says hypothalamic functions, so that emotional responsiveness is diminished. The effects of these agents upon the production, maintenance, and manifestations of dissociative states have never been studied. So what he's saying is that we've never studied these dissociative states properly, and we've definitely never studied dissociative states that are induced through substances and other like means, like different states that can induce them, like sleep deprivation, isolation, etc.
Okay. Sure. There hasn't been actual in-depth, rigorous research.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So that document, this was the only page that's given of this document from a Freedom of Information Act request. That's the only one you can read. In the proposal, Jolly outlines plans for these experiments with, quote, hypnotizability, suggestibility, and the role of certain drugs in altering these attributes. So, for about 4 decades, Jolly West would dedicate himself to studying all of this and come away with a conclusion. Certain methodologies could be used to produce dissociative states, create new identities, and force amnesia on subjects.
For 40 years?
40 years. And the way that they are able to determine that it's 40, because, like, here's the thing. When you're a CIA asset, you're always a CIA asset, is sort of my impression of the situation. And he would go on in his professional career to write about this stuff too. So, like, even beyond his official work in the capacity as a CIA asset, he would also write. So, like, I read a couple things. There's a book that I read called The CIA Doctors, Human Rights Violations by American Psychiatrists.
There you
which
go.
Is a book
riveting reading.
By Colin Ross. And like the way they're determining how long he seems to have worked on this stuff is they're having to go into other psychiatrists' books where they're like consulting with him and stuff and naming him, and they have to track him. They do a bunch of things to track, and so about 40 years he is involved with the study of this stuff.
Wow.
So all that being said, there were some road bumps on the way to reaching the conclusion that the dissociative states and all that, there are road bumps on the way to reaching his conclusion. One of my sources on Jolly West is an article written by Tom O'Neill and Dan Piepenbring. It's an interesting last name. But O'Neill is the author behind the book Chaos, which I've read.
And I've started. I finished.
Okay.
I've read the first like chapter or two and need to get back to it, but keep getting distracted by other things.
Well, for folks out there who maybe don't know, Chaos is a book about the Manson family and the Tate LaBianca murders, and a bunch of other stuff connected to that. And we cannot go into the weeds on that, but it is actually something that I've had somebody request that we discuss.
Oh, really? Okay.
On the show. So maybe someday when we've both got it read, we can like just talk about it. So we'll see. But the article by O'Neill, it's titled "Inside the Archive of an LSD Researcher with Ties to the CIA's MK Ultra Mind Control Project." This is published by The Intercept. And I have a little snippet here about how deep in our boy Jolly West was. West headed the psychiatry department at UCLA and the school's renowned neuroscience center until his retirement in 1988. One day, among a batch of research papers on hypnosis in West's archives there, I found letters between West and his CIA handler, Sherman Grifford. So, to be clear, what's happening here is O'Neill had Jolly West's documents before they were disappeared.
Okay.
He has a CIA handler, Sherman Grifford, and it goes on to say, this was the cover name, according to John Marks's The Search for the Manchurian Candidate for Sidney Gottlieb.
Interesting. Okay.
Which Sidney Gottlieb is the man who is the champion of the MKUltra program and the guy who developed poisons and stuff even after MKUltra. Go listen to our episodes if you want to know more. So
the old poisoner in chief himself.
Exactly. So West, who had once written to a magazine editor that he had, quote, never worked for the CIA, had in fact worked closely with the agency's black sorcerer himself. The letters picked up midstream with no prologue or preliminaries. The first was dated June 11th, 1953, a mere 2 months after MKUltra started, when West was chief of the psychiatric service at the air base at Lackland. So we have an idea of when he got brought into the project. Addressing Gottlieb as SG, West outlined the experiments he proposed to perform using a combination of psychotropic drugs and hypnosis. He began with a plan to discover, quote, the degree to which information can be extracted from presumably unwilling subjects through hypnosis alone or in combination with certain drugs, possibly with subsequent amnesia for the interrogation and or alteration of the subject's recollection of the information he formerly knew. Another item...
That's a fucked up statement. The information you formerly knew. Which can take that out of there.
Another item proposed honing, quote, techniques for implanting false information into particular subjects or for inducing in them specific mental disorders. He hoped to create couriers who would carry, quote, a long and complex message embedded secretly in their minds and to study, quote, the induction of trance states by drugs. His list lined up perfectly with the goals of MKUltra. Needless to say, West added, the experiments must eventually be put to test in practical trials in the field. To this end, he asked Gottlieb for, quote, some sort of carte blanche.
Any kind. Just let me do whatever I want.
Who would the guinea pigs be? He listed 4 groups, basic airmen, volunteers, patients, and, quote, others, possibly including prisoners in the local stockade. Only the volunteers would be paid. The others could be unwilling and, though it wasn't spelled out, unwitting. It would be easier to preserve the secrecy if he were, quote, inducing specific mental disorders in people who already exhibited them. Quote, certain patients requiring hypnosis and therapy or suffering from dissociative disorders, trances, fugues, amnesias, etc., might lend themselves to our experiments. Official investigations into MKUltra yielded little information about its subjects, but West's letter suggests that the program cast a wide net.
Man, it'd be really easier if we could just have people who are already very mentally ill so that we can break them down easier.
They fucked up the lives of like a bunch of schizophrenics with MKUltra. Like they were looking... I mentioned, I don't need to rehash stuff from those episodes. Go listen to those. Honestly, you should listen to those before you listen to this one. Now, big red warning, big warning. We have to talk about some grim stuff briefly.
Okay.
On July 4th, 1954, in San Antonio, Texas, a 3-year-old girl was raped and murdered.
Jesus.
She had been left in a truck in the parking lot of a bar by her parents who wanted to go in and have a drink. Within an hour of the parents finding the girl missing, a man is found by a search party. The man's name is Richard Shaver, and he's discovered stumbling around in the nighttime darkness. Now, when this search party finds him, he doesn't make any attempt to escape them. Witnesses say that he was found shirtless, covered in blood and scratches, and he looked dazed or in a trance-like state. So he's arrested. He's 29 years old. He had been married recently, has 2 young children, no history of being violent, no criminal record as far as I know. Now, he had been at the bar where this girl had been abducted from. But he had left with a friend that night, and that friend told police that neither of them were drunk. But he's like, when he's assessed, they determined that he seemed like he might be high on something, But I don't think they
Okay.
ever conclusively say that he had any drugs in his system. Now, before they can actually take Shaver to the county jail, a constable from another precinct just shows up. And he says, I've got orders from military police to take him into custody.
Interesting. Okay.
So 4 a.m, there's an Air Force marshal who comes in to question Shaver and talk with the 2 doctors that are examining him. They concur he's not drunk. One of the doctors would later testify that he, quote, probably was not normal. He was very composed outside, which I did not expect him to be under these circumstances. He then gets taken to the county jail where he's booked for rape and murder. Now, he gets questioned for hours all the way through the morning. Eventually, they bring Shaver's wife in, and when she shows up, he doesn't know who she is. He doesn't recognize her.
Damn. Okay.
His first official statement comes at 10:30 a.m., and he insists that he is not guilty. He says there is another man. And he says that he has an image of a man, a stranger, a person he doesn't know, with tattoos and blonde hair. But once the Air Force Marshal comes back to the jail, Shaver is now signing a document saying that he takes full responsibility. But he still doesn't remember anything. But he says, maybe I don't remember everything, but I must have done it. You know, this looks really bad, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So he's sitting in jail. They are spending time with him trying to figure out what he knows. But 2 months after his arrest, and Shaver's memories are not returning. He doesn't remember what happened that night. So they order a psychiatric evaluation. The man tasked with the evaluation of Richard Shaver was Dr. Louis Jolly West. Jolly is just with Shaver for the next 2 weeks. He is supervising him. They go back to the scene of the crime. They're trying to see if they can get him to remember stuff. And with that failing, Jolly hypnotizes Shaver and gives him an injection of sodium pentothal, which is notoriously the truth serum, in an attempt to try and clear up this amnesia. Now, according to testimony, while Shaver is under the influence of the sodium pentothal, he is able to then recall what happened that night. And he confesses to killing the girl. He claims that there were these repressed memories of his cousin, a woman who had sexually abused him when he was a child. And he started drinking at home that night before he went to the bar. And then he, quote, had visions of God who whispered into his ear to seek out and kill the evil little girl.
Okay, but I guess they didn't do any testing to confirm he wasn't drunk. They just
I think they give him a breathalyzer. I'm pretty sure that they give him a breathalyzer and he's not drunk. But again, in this testimony that he gives under the influence of whatever the sodium pentothal, he says, I had been drinking at home that night before I go out to the bar, and all these memories came flooding back, and it made me want to kill. So the point here is that when he was hypnotized and involved with Jolly, he confessed to murder.
Right.
When he would go to trial, the entire time he is at trial, he maintains his innocence clear up until his execution in 1958.
Damn. Okay.
And Jolly says that Shaver suffered a, quote, bout of temporary insanity that night. And while they're like at trial and stuff, he's saying that even though he had a bout of temporary insanity, he's very much sane now.
God, this is so shady.
Yeah,
Jesus
it's
Christ.
fucking weird, huh? It's a weird ass story. Now, in the newspaper, they're reporting what Shaver's demeanor is during the trial. And one of the accounts says that he, quote, sat through the strenuous sessions like a man in a trance. He never got up to do anything. He was apparently a chain smoker. He never got up to go get a cigarette. And let me just read this next part.
Okay.
Quote, large portions of West's truth serum interview with Shaver were read into the court record. The doctor had used leading questions to walk the entranced Shaver through the crime. Tell me about when you took your clothes off, Jimmy, he'd said. The transcript of the interview, which survived among West's papers, also showed West trying to prove that Shaver had repressed memories. Jimmy, do you remember when something like this happened before? Or, after you took her clothes off, what did you do? I never did take her clothes off, Shaver said. The interview was divided into thirds, and the middle third hadn't been recorded. When the transcript picked up, it said, Shaver is crying. He has been confronted with all the facts repeatedly. West asked, now you remember it all, don't you, Jimmy? Yes, sir, Shaver replied.
Jesus Christ. The interview's been split into 3 parts, and the middle one that, seems to be where the turn of heart happened, being gone, is so... This is so fucked.
Yeah, it's fucking weird, right? There's this other really fucking weird thing where lawyers bring up the Shaver's weird medical history because Shaver had reportedly suffered severe migraines. And these would get so bad that what he would do is he would dunk his head in a bucket of ice water when he could feel a migraine coming on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so severe that the Air Force recommended him to enter into a 2-year experimental program.
And I'm assuming that experimental program has some connections?
There is no court record or transcript of the name of the doctor who tried to recruit him into this program. And when Jolly is called to the stand to talk about this, he says that he'd never actually figured out whether or not Shaver had been treated in some experimental program. And O'Neill, when talking with Lackland officials about this stuff, trying to get to the bottom of it, they tell O'Neill there is, quote, no record of him in their master index of patients, but curiously, according to the base's archivist, all the records for patients in 1954 had been maintained with one exception. The file for last names beginning with SA through ST had vanished.
Jesus. God, this is so stinky of a cover-up. This is ridiculous.
Fucking weird. One of the things that he talks about in the article, O'Neill cites a drug researcher named Charles Fisher, and he's talking about how, like, when you would take LSD, even at this time, even probably among the people at the CIA, if you remember from MK Ultra, they're drugging each other sometimes spontaneously without them knowing it and all this stuff.
Yep.
Usually, though, you have a trip leader, like somebody to watch over you while you're doing this. And they suggest in this article that the suggestibility that a subject has when they're under the influence of LSD, it's similar to hypnosis. You are more easily suggestible while you are taking it. And again, this guy, Jolly West, is studying both these things at the same time. And they have a quote here from Charles Fisher where he says, quote, you can tell somebody to hurt somebody, but you call it something else. Hammer the nail into the wood, and the wood perhaps is a human being. So
yeah, okay.
It's such a weird, like, there's a whole aside where one of the psychiatrists that worked with Jolly West was so baffled by what happened with Richard Shaver that he would write a play about it. Like, there's a whole play about this, apparently.
That's the weirdest, like, this made so little sense a guy wrote a play.
Yeah.
That's a new one for me.
A guy named Gilbert Rose. I forget the name of the play. It's not that important, but Gilbert Rose wrote a play about it. He had worked with West on this, and he says this, quote, in my 50 years in the profession, that was the most dramatic moment ever, when he clapped his hands to his face and remembered killing the girl. Now, O'Neill tells Rose, because he interviews this guy who worked with West in 2002. He tells Rose that Jolly had actually hypnotized Shaver and also given him the sodium pentothal, which apparently shocked Rose. He didn't know about that.
Okay.
And he also brings up how, like, this guy was confused about how West had, like, found out about the case, like, immediately. He knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were involved from day one. The morning of the murder, Jolly West phones this other psychiatrist, Rose, to bring him in on the case. So he knew about it instantly.
Immediately. Almost before it happened. Like, yeah, Jesus. Okay.
And this is the thing, is like, you read all these articles about the guy. He is a proponent of peace, and he's like, he attended, like, I think sit-ins for, like, anti-war stuff, and he's all this stuff. And after this day, he also would be an opponent of capital punishment for the rest of his life, as far as I understand it. And the sort of insinuation here is, like, did he realize that he basically sentenced a man who may have been innocent? It's hard to say. I don't know whether
and it's
he's
also
innocent,
like saying someone like that, drawing a, like, you don't want to be wrong about saying that kind of criminal is innocent.
Exactly,
you know,
exactly. And the thing is, like, if Jolly West is right about his conclusions about suggestibility, forced amnesia, all these things that we've mentioned, did they fucking fuck with this guy's mind?
Yeah,
and it caused him to, like, it led to him killing somebody, this little girl. Like, it's, I don't know with any conclusion. Like, I don't have a conclusion there, but it's so fucking weird and shady that you're just like, what happened here? What happened?
Yeah.
Here? That's not the only weird shit, though. I want to give you a little bit of a relatively rapid fire list of the other weird shit that, like, Richard Shaver is probably the most bizarre aspect of all this, with all the shady little details. There's other shit that's like, what the fuck? When you like, knowing that it's this guy and his involvement with these things, you're like, what the fuck? That is so shady.
Yeah.
In 1962, Jolly West is investigating something called must in elephants, which I didn't look too deep into this, but the idea is, like, elephants will secrete this, like, brown goo substance, and while they're secreting it, they are also, like, I guess, a bit more aggressive.
Okay.
And the idea here is, I think he's looking for tests of the stuff that he's interested in learning about.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, like, you know how we'll test on mice or whatever, he's, like, replicating these things in animals.
Yeah, he wants to find non-human test subjects that he can probably have a lot more of with less hassle.
Yes. Now, another thing that I've seen people say is that Jolly West would later cite this particular incident and use it to say, I only ever experimented on animals. I never experimented on a human. Even though we have documents where he's talking with Sidney Gottlieb, the black sorcerer of the CIA, about human test subjects. So, total liar in that regard.
Yeah.
He ends up going to the Lincoln Park Zoo in Oklahoma City with some LSD. He then doses an elephant there named Tusco. And what they're supposedly what they were trying to do is to trigger a state akin to how elephants are when they have must. But instead of actually being able to replicate the state, the elephant just has a seizure within 5 minutes after the LSD is administered. And they're trying to figure out what to do. They end up administering an antipsychotic to the elephant. They injected something like 2,800 milligrams over 11 minutes. It did nothing. And in fact, it's believed that this decision may have actually accelerated the death of the elephant, who they just killed with LSD.
Jesus. This is like the worst elephant experiment thing since Thomas Edison.
Yeah.
That's Jesus.
Horrible.
All right.
It's like it dies an hour and 40 minutes after the LSD is actually administered. And the thing that's so funny is some other folks, some other scientists are like, let's try doing this experiment properly with elephants.
Why? No statistical rigor, no scientific method.
What they think had happened was that these guys had made the mistake of they had scaled the dose in proportions to the animal's body weight instead of its brain weight.
Oh, so they like overdosed it
on LSD. So when these people replicate the experiment doing it correctly, the elephant's weird for a couple hours, kind of having a weird time, and then he's fine.
Mm-hmm. So they probably like gave this thing like 100 times the dose that it would actually take, and that just caused this thing to fucking die. Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And then I read that, and I start to also again question that this fucking egomaniac weirdo is correct in his conclusions about any of this.
Yeah. Like,
I mean, think about the fact that they funded the bunk research on through Stargate that like was fucking nothing for psychic abilities and shit. It's like this is all happening around the same time. They clearly get involved with people who don't actually put up anything, you know?
They decided to like go heavy on fringe science and put their trust in a bunch of people who do not have very tangential ideas of what is like proper scientific research.
Yeah,
it's Jesus Christ.
It's fucking crazy. So it's like between him killing an elephant because he doesn't know how to administer the LSD to it and stuff, and they don't know these things and all that shit. But then between that and the Richard Shaver case and how fucking insane everything surrounding that is, I no longer know what to believe.
Yeah.
It's so weird. So couple more things that I want to hit that honestly, each of these things, they're their own episode. But I want to bring up that Jolly West was a guy involved because it's so strange. So Jolly West was a court-appointed expert witness without any fee to examine Jack Ruby, with Jack Ruby being the man who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald, who was the assassin of President John F. Kennedy in 1963.
Fantastic.
So
I knew that name sounded familiar.
Initially, I guess there's a whole story here, and again, I'm not going to get into the weeds. The judge, I guess, initially doesn't allow Jolly to be Ruby's psychiatrist. And every doctor that examines Ruby finds him to be sane. Ruby is sentenced to the electric chair, but under appeal, a lawyer named Dr. Hubert Smith is brought in. And Smith is the one who then actually goes out of his way to hire Jolly West as Ruby's psychiatrist, which the judge initially had kind of sussed out was weird.
Mm-hmm.
And after Jolly gets involved, Jack Ruby's pronounced psychotic and delusional, and they suggest more interrogation while he's under the influence of sodium thiopental and hypnosis.
Okay, and so we got this guy off of the electric chair so that we can pump him full of drugs and make him admit to shit.
Yeah, and hypnotize him. It's fucking what?
Oh my God.
So Jolly West...
Jolly, you fucking lunatic.
Jolly West says, quote, "I found Ruby to be suffering from a major mental illness, apparently precipitated by the stress of the trial and its aftermath, from which he never recovered." So because Jolly West steps in and says this, there's no death sentence, and Ruby just dies of cancer in prison later.
Okay.
The Jack Ruby is a bizarre story in and of itself, and Jolly West was there for it. In 1967, again, this is a whole, this is in some parts of chaos. Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, California. It's an intersection in California that has a whole bunch of weird shit going on.
Yep.
Jolly West basically gets a bunch of grad students from, I think, Berkeley, and he just sets them up at a quote unquote crash pad, which is this place where hippies would just be allowed to come and hang out. Like, it was basically, they would have people sitting out on like the front area and be like, it's a hippie safe space, basically.
Yeah, come do whatever you want here. All right.
But what Jolly West seems to want from this is he wants to dose the hippies there with LSD and have these grad students basically take notes on the hippies that are hanging out there getting, high on LSD. And reportedly, Jolly West, he goes in, he talks to these grad students. He tells them, you're going to take notes on these people here. This is, all we want to know about these people who show up here. And then he would disappear and not be at the crash pad. And then he would periodically show back up comically in costume as a hippie. Like, he grows his hair out and tries to pass himself off as a hippie. But his presence as a not hippie, as a guy trying to clearly pass himself off as a hippie, apparently freaks out the actual hippies who show up there. So people will leave and they have trouble getting people to show up. It's so fucking weird. There's the students are like, what are we fucking doing here? We don't really understand what this is about. Can't get into this. Don't have time. There's connections to Manson here as well. That'll be another episode, I think.
Yeah, there probably has to be a Manson Conspiracies episode at some point.
The final weird-ass little connected thing that I have to bring up about Jolly West. He was also called as an expert witness to examine Patty Hearst in 1976. Do you know anything about Patty Hearst?
I know the name, and isn't that like a Stockholm syndrome thing?
Well, that's what I think one of the things that gets said about this case.
Yeah, which Stockholm syndrome is also a thing that I think ended up being bunk. So, but Patty Hearst, if I remember correctly, was that the bank robbery one, or was that
she is with the Symbionese Liberation Army, which it has some sus shit surrounding it. But so she's on trial for a bank robbery that she basically gets kidnapped and then becomes a part of this group. And Jolly West is appointed because he is a brainwashing expert. He works without fee once again. And he says that she showed all the, quote, classic signs of coercion, brainwashing, and, like you said, the Stockholm effect.
Right.
Ultimately, he writes an article about the whole situation saying that President Carter should release Patty Hearst from prison. And he says this, quote, "We found her legally sane and thus able to stand trial, but psychologically damaged as a result of torture by the SLA. So she gets convicted, but she gets released in 1979 because then President Jimmy Carter commutes her sentence. So he's involved in this trial, which the Symbionese Liberation Army and Patty Hearst, that's an entire episode, straight up. Right. I guess what I'm trying to point out here is Jack Ruby, the SLA, and Patty Hearst, all these things, the crash pad and Hate Ashbury, those are all episodes. This guy got his fucking fingers in shit that are entire episodes of It Gets Weird. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, this guy has a bit of a brainwashing Forrest Gump throughout the history of the CIA.
Weird. He just keeps showing up at all these important things. The final thing that I think could also be its own episode is Jolly West claims that Scientologists went after him. Because he had contributed to a 1980 textbook that in the textbook, he refers to Scientology as a cult.
Yeah. Okay.
And he actually participates in this panel on cults with the American Psychiatric Association, which I think you can actually find videos of this online.
Okay.
And each speaker at this conference receives a letter from Scientology threatening lawsuits if they're mentioned at all. And everybody else is intimidated, but Jolly West, who's the last speaker, basically says, fuck you. And he says this during the talk, quote, I read parts of the letter to the 1,000 plus psychiatrists and then told any Scientologists in the crowd to pay attention. I said I would like to advise my colleagues that I consider Scientology a cult and L. Ron Hubbard a quack and a fake. I wasn't about to let them intimidate me. And the thing that we could probably do an episode on is there's this thing called Operation Freakout. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of this?
I think I've heard the name in passing, but couldn't give you any. So no, basically.
The Church of Scientology, they had a covert operation straight up where they wanted to get a journalist named Paulette Cooper. They wanted to basically get her imprisoned or committed to a psych ward where she couldn't come back.
Because she was doing research on Scientology
I think so.
damning them a little bit.
Again, we could do a whole episode on it, but Jolly West basically is arguing that he was also a target of this Operation Freakout thing.
Interesting. All right.
So to round things off here, Jolly West died in 1999. He was living in Los Angeles. He was 74.
Oh, didn't quite make it to the new millennium.
Didn't quite make it. He had cancer. And he passed away in 1999. And like I said, all these obituaries, they talk about everything, but it's weird to me because so much of this shit would have been, there was a lot of this that I believe would have been out in the open because of the commissions and the panels to when the CIA had the big upturning in the 70s after Watergate and stuff. Which honestly, that entire saga is also its own episode, really. So yeah, Jolly West, he is going to probably pop up again because he's just involved with so much weird fucking shit. So much.
I wonder, I think this is in the running for most times we've said that's probably another episode in a single episode. This guy popped up everywhere. It makes sense.
I didn't know how to talk about these things because if we were to talk about all the stuff that he was involved in, we would be here for 4 or 5 hours.
Holly Jolly West month. You could do a fucking month on this guy.
Yeah. I can't even begin to talk about how fucking weird stuff surrounding Patty Hearst is. It's all strange. And Jack Ruby, obviously, it's people have dedicated entire books and websites to analyzing all the shit that happened with Jack Ruby because it's connected to JFK. You can't. It's impossible to talk about. But the point is, these are all fucking Jolly West. He is a spook's lapdog of the spook's lapdog of all time.
Yeah. Don't trust this man.
Do not trust this man. He's dead. He cannot be trusted. Sure. But for other reasons, if he were alive, you couldn't trust him either. But he's also dead, so it doesn't matter. Whew. How do you feel?
It's an interesting figure. It's always, there are these certain episodes that you hit on something where it kind of recontextualizes, looking at someone who is so diehard on brainwashing and everything is an interesting thing to look at because that's such a commonality in a lot of these kinds of circles. Brainwashing is such a thing with the CIA, with this time period, with all of these other things that looking into someone who was studying that and doing the research and possibly, trying to make it work in real life and may have had some level of success depending on what you consider brainwashing. It is just, now whenever we talk about brainwashing, I'm going to link it to Jolly West.
Good.
It's one of those episodes,
I think that's for the best because Uh, I think that there is yeah. I'm glad you're going to associate his name. Let me leave it at that. Yeah,
Mhm.
Jolly West, total fucking freak, total freak.
Yeah.
And this is not the last we hear of him. So
Part of that CIA whack pack.
Yeah. So Niall, all that being said, are you ready for a big question?
I am so ready.
Okay. So, if you were to take LSD
Fantastic.
and an animal was to be your guide on your trip, your LSD trip guide, what animal would you like to be there to comfort you and keep you stable while you explore the psychedelic unknown?
Interesting. That's because, like, God, there are certain things that spring to mind where it's like that's probably too simple of an answer. But I also because interesting. Okay, so let me just kind of work out my thought process
Sure.
here, because I think you don't want something that's so massive or so intimidating that it might scare you.
Yeah.
So you want something that is friendly. You want something that is not going to trample you or anything like that.
Yeah.
So like even something the size of a horse is probably
Think about
too big.
this. You don't want something so small that you're like nervous about accidentally stepping on it while you're hallucinating.
Yeah.
You know?
That too. Like
So-
I wouldn't want it to be a bug or something.
And you don't
or
want it-
even like a mouse.
You don't want it to be something that could maybe like induce a dissociative state in you and make you kill. That's, I think, also an
Yeah,
important
that's also
factor.
a really
So
big
probably
thing
no
that you would want
humans.
to not do. Yeah,
Probably no humans.
the most dangerous game.
Exactly. Can I tell
so
you what
I
mine
was-
is if you haven't figured
go
this
for
out? I've found the perfect animal for this.
Mhm.
It's a chinchilla.
Interesting. Okay. Now that is something that I don't know if this is something that I knew personally or some story that I just heard. Those things are very sit-onable in a way that will then murder them. So
Okay.
you know, I guess factor that into your thoughts. But
where
what
did
was
you-
your reasoning?
Where did you hear about somebody sitting on a chinchilla?
I honestly don't remember. It just whenever you
no.
said chinchilla, I think it was a family friend growing up.
Oh, okay.
Of my
Okay.
mom's.
I picked chinchilla mainly because they're supposed to be incredibly, like, remarkably soft. And you know that when you're coming up on that LSD, I guess this is maybe more, I think this is more of a shrooms thing, but like you want to like touch nice things and
Sensations.
sensations.
Yeah, sure.
I still, the sensations are still like good when you're on LSD. So I think having a chinchilla that you could like hold in your lap. Here's the thing. Here's how you're not going to crush it. Your trip is going to be you're sitting in a comfortable chair and the chinchilla is in your lap and you're petting it. You have it in front of you. It's like sort of it's not like a super small creature, but it's to me just big enough that you will always be aware of it and you won't, like fucking kill it somehow. So
Yeah, there you go.
I think you're going to want to pet this chinchilla and you're going to stare into its beautiful eyes and learn a lot about the universe and reality on your trip with the chinchilla. That's my suggestion.
Fair enough. So I had two kind of thoughts,
Okay.
and one of which you might get kind of discarded for a reason, which I'll start with that one.
Okay.
What could I make it sort of a Ratatouille situation?
I was
where
gonna
not only is it my guide, but it's actually controlling me.
Oh, okay. I thought you were gonna say it's talking to you, but controlling you is it's
Like it's on my head with the hair
Okay.
and its little mitts,
Sure.
and it's actually controlling me. So like that would be like a rat.
I will allow that if I can go back and say my chinchilla can talk to me and it sings like James Taylor. It has the voice of James Taylor.
Interesting. America's Songbird, James Taylor.
That's what they call him.
I don't know. I just always think of him. He is randomly plays at the White House in an episode of The West Wing.
What the fuck?
Yeah, they just like cut to like a song, like 3 minutes of James Taylor.
That's very weird and super cool and honestly makes me like politics.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying
but
that like I'm gonna look into this chinchilla's eyes and it's gonna look back to me and it's gonna be like, whenever I see your smiling face, I have to smile myself because I love you. Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
do.
yeah.
That's what the chinchilla's gonna do.
little soft rock action.
But sorry, go ahead with your Ratatouille
No,
situation.
like the Ratatouille thing. I think the Ratatouille is like an interesting because like I don't know, maybe you could make maybe the rat could be under someone else's control. So like it's like so say Jolly West has like LSD'd this rat and has gotten it under its control, and then that thing is controlling me. So like it's like a maybe that's 2 layers of abstraction here, but
maybe
it
what
would
if
be
you
interesting.
had somebody cool controlling the rat? That
like Tony Hawk.
I was gonna say Weird Al, Tony Hawk or Weird Al. Those are your choices, actually.
Those honestly either they can take turns. Yeah. Like let me hit a 6 skateboard trick and then follow that up with an accordion solo.
Tony's gonna try and get you to hit a Christ air, which is
there we go.
Gonna be kind of
best
cool.
Skateboard trick.
Probably it's the most interesting name for a skateboard trick, I think. For me,
probably. It's up there.
Weird Al will get you to play the accordion through the mouse, which he controls through LSD. So great answer. I accept the Ratatouille hypothesis.
Yeah, the Ratatouille LSD situation. That's
good. No, I like that. So yeah, Jolly West was fucked up, huh? That's the episode. Like I said, we'll hear from him again.
Yeah. So do you want to take care of some business?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at IGW Podcast.
You can follow us on Facebook.com/ItGetsWeirdPodcast.
We're also on all your favorite podcatchers. If you look up It Gets Weird on wherever you listen to podcasts, we're probably there.
You can also follow us on Blue Sky. I think we're just at It Gets Weird. I snagged that one. So go and check us out on Blue Sky. Twitch.tv/ItGetsWeird. I'm at the very end of Shadow of the Erd Tree with our good friend Colin, friend of the show Colin. But we'll continue to be live streaming there, so go ahead and check it out. Give us a follow. We have a lot of fun there. I tell Twitch exclusive stories there. So if that sounds cool to you, you got to check it out. Email us at itgetsweirdpodcast@gmail.com. If you have a good story, if you want to tell us something, maybe honestly, I haven't had somebody correct me on anything in a long time. And I'm in constant fear that I've said something incorrect on the podcast. So if you know better than me, I would love to know, and I will, give a shouts out to you. But just let us know how we should address you. If you could send us a story or whatever, let us know how you want us to address you when we read it on the show. Now, of course, most important of all, patreon.com/itgetsweird. We have a $1 tier. It is a tip tier, basically, where you're just giving us $1 saying, hey, thanks for doing the show. But if you want bonus content, we have a $2 tier and a $5 tier. At the $2 tier, you get It Gets Weird TV, where every other week, Niall and I are talking about weird television. We are about halfway through Neon Genesis Evangelion, discussing the weird shit going on in that show. And then at the $5 tier, in the off weeks of It Gets Weird TV, you have World of Weird, where Niall and I talk about whatever the fuck we want to talk about. If you like the tangents on the main show, it's basically like that for a full episode. And we have a lot of fun talking about stuff that we're interested in. So that's been a good time. So at the $5 tier, you get World of Weird plus It Gets Weird TV. It's a huge back catalog of bonus content that we've got there. Hours and hours and hours of bonus content. Whether you donate to the $2 tier or the $5 tier, you get access to the main show 2 days early on Friday instead of Sunday on your own personal Patreon feed. And you get access to the Discord where we're hanging out, chatting with our listeners directly. The people are hitting us up there all the time, talking with us about all kinds of stuff, Bigfoot, conspiracies, UFOs, you name it. But if you can't donate, please tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your congressman all about It Gets Weird podcast.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for continuing to support the show. This has been It Gets Weird, and I've been Niall.
And I'm Kyle, signing out.